Alright, Treasury Financial Manual, Volume 1, Part 3, Chapter 6200. Chapter 6200, Exemption of the class federal payments for the Treasury Offset Program. Treasury Financial Manual prescribes, Chapter prescribes the chain of the procedure regarding exemption class for the payments for the centralized administrative offset of the Treasury Financial Manual. Chapter replaces supersede the standard procedure of the exemption class for federal payment of the Treasury Offset Program, which is issued January 4th, 2001, and updated September 3rd, 2013. Payment exemption previously granted by the Secretary of the Treasury for the remaining effective on the unit unless expressly revoked. Section 6210 of the Bank of the Bureau, officials of the Bureau of the Department of the Treasury serve as the primary disbursement officer of the federal government officials serve as the officer of the Treasury offset for the collect for the delinquent federal state with the debts for the offset of levying payments of the made delinquent debtors. Central federal payment is statutory exempt the centralized administrative effect the other payments are made to exempt the centralized administrative of the Secretary of the Treasury upon the request of the federal agency for the issue of the payment. Section 6220 scope of the provision of the Treasury Financial Management Chapter Financial Manual Chapter explaining that the federal agency may submit the request the Secretary with the exemption of the class of payment centralized administrative offset prescribed the chain of the under the Secretary will evaluate the response of the request of the Treasury Financial Manual Chapter does not apply with any payments made with the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. Section 2030 definition terms and definition related to the chapter of the police of the TFM glossary. 6240 general rule federal payment subject to the offset of the tops of unless expected the federal statute with the action of the Secretary. 6250 with a federal statutory exemption. Some federal states that have the particular certain type of the payments for the credit of the only state with the explicitly prohibit the payment offset of the either by using the offset of the reference of the Title 31 U.S. Standard Code 3716. These type of the payments except for the offset of the Treasury Offset Program. Other statutes may exempt the certain payment to levy the garnishment of other legal profit to become the other legal process generally refer to the right of the process for the enforcement of the judgment of the statute do not on their face exempt the payments of the offset of the head of the payment agency shall notify the Secretary of the any statutory exemption offset if they have applicable to the payment officials of the payment agency that can make the necessary adjustment of the payment of profits to ensure such payment is not offset with the notification should be made with the individual list of Section 627010 of the Treasury Financial Management Chapter. Section 6260 the exemption of secretary payments for the means tested. 626010 when requested to have the payment agency with the Secretary exempt the centralized administrative offset for the class for the payments made with under the means of the tested program. Secretary may exempt the class for the payments prospectively has no authority to grant retroactive exemptions. 626020 payments over the program of the not mean test of the request of the head of the program payment agency. The Secretary may exempt of the centralized administrative offset of the class of the payment made under the program that does not mean test of the Secretary may accept as exempt of the class of the payments prospectively have no authority to grant retroactive exemptions. In evaluating the request of exemption of the class of the payments under the non-mean tested program, the Secretary shall consider the following requests. 626020A with the program purpose clearly articulated with the agency that demonstrated the offset would tend to interfere substantially with or defeat the purpose of the program may set forth the program authorizing statute accompanying legislative history or the congressional report of the congressional material that describe the agency mentioned. Secretary will consider whether the offset would interfere with the substantially with or defeat the articulated purpose of the program. And then we're going to skip the example. 62B are the receipt of the government earmark statute regulations specific purpose if it is fellow of the agency demonstrate with the offset with the interfere with the substantially with the defeat the program purpose because of the payment of the receipt will be unable to proceed with the earmark purpose. Secretary will consider the payments made under the particular program must be either the recipient for a specific purpose or whether the offset will interfere substantially with or defeat the purpose. And we're going to skip that. Example 626020C in its administrative offset with cost effects for the Secretary will consider the whether the benefits of conduct with the administrative offset will outweigh the cost and consider the fact of the Secretary will consider the value of the dollars amount of the payments for which the exemption is sought if they available the historic off the information. We're going to skip the example. 6262D for the information administrative offset feasible. Secretary will consider administrative feasibility of the conducting offset. Skip the example. 6220E for the will administrative offset tend to interfere with the substantial with or defeat with the important national interest. The Secretary will consider whether the offset would tend to interfere with the substantial with the defeat of the important national interest of the national security, foreign relations, law enforcement. If so, the Secretary will consider whether the interest outweighs the U.S. government interest in collecting with the likeness with regarding the class of payments issue. Section 6270 submitting the exemption report. 6270 with the informal discussion payment to agents believe the exemption of special class of payment that may be warned that should contact officials if it's discovered informally need the exemption. Although absent to meet the agency concerning the contact point and the information discovered the Directory Treasury Offset Program debt with the management services. 627020 formal request exemptions. 627020A, the general is after informal discussion, officials of the payment agency determine the formal request for the exemption of the property for the head payments of the agency may request the class payments exempted for the centralized administrative officer for the request of the must be writing. 6270B 627020B require the information all exemption request the requesting agency to submit the information clear in support of the request exemption, including each of the following items. The narrative statement that clearly identifies the class of payments with exemptions request to specify the purpose of the program with the agency believe the program mean tested and non-mean tested for the citation for the relevant statute of the regulation governing the program. 627020C with the required information exemption request for the mean test of the payments. Additional information specified in 627020B with the Treasury financial manual. Show that the requesting agency must provide each of the following items clear and indicate for the program purposes of the provide adequate statement of the living of the program beneficiaries, description of beneficiary program criteria used in the program to determine that if it's a beneficiary need program assistance. Or 627020D with the required information exemption request for the non-mean tested payments for the addition of the information specified in 627020B with the Treasury financial manual chapter requesting agency to provide each of the following items. Detailed justification exemption purpose pursuant to the applicable standard set forth in subsection 626020 with the Treasury financial manual chapter. If the request exemption is justified in whole of the part of the base, if it is offset with the non-cost-effective administrative fees for the total number of the dollar amounts payable to the class of the estimate to be disbursed on the annual basis of the foreseeable future. 627020E, administrating addressing the request agency must send the request to the Commissioner of the Bureau officials of the U.S. Department of Treasury. Agency will send a copy to the Directory Treasury Offset Program Debit Services. 6280 request additional information. Officials of the service request the incomplete the needs more information. Official services will notify the requesting agency request the incomplete the discrepancy. If the information must be submitted for the complete with the exemption request. If the reasonable period of the time the Secretary has not received additional information, officials will notify the requesting official of the request is considered withdrawn. 6285, if the Secretary will provide the written response with the request after submission for the completed request of the responding, any of the request exemption of the Secretary may grant the exemption of the whole and part of the denied of the exemption, and the whole and part of the Secretary may also suggest alternate actions. Section 6290, revoking exemptions. Additional exemption for the grant of the Secretary permanent. However, the Secretary may revoke the previously granted the exemption. The Secretary determined the permanent to do so. Official services will notify the payment agency such a revocation. Contacts direct inquiry with concern with the Treasury financial manual chapter. Department of Treasury Bureau official of Debt Services, and that was chapter 6200 exemption class A class of federal payments for the Treasury offset program.